Hello everyone, welcome to Beskidy. We are out in the field. We have picked up these logs in our new auto-loading trailer here, log loading trailer, so it's kind of helpful to get it out of all this tall grass. Last episode we showed kind of how it basically worked, and then I took us out of game to kind of show some of the changes. And because there was so much involved with this one, I think it takes more than one episode to describe it, so I'm sorry this one's gonna be technical in nature again, but I kind of want to show it just in case, you know, there's anybody else who wants to do it on their own or for their game, or just to kind of see in general kind of how some of these things are put together. In the previous episode we talked about the mod desk file, this here an XML file. We talked about the XML file and the changes that were put in here. We talked about the i3D file, you know, in the trailer, as to some of the changes and things that were added here that are called up by the XML file or noted here and as indexed in it. And then we started getting into the script a little bit over here. This bale attacher, kind of a misnomer. It doesn't pick up bales anymore. It would never work for that now. It only would work on logs. So I was kind of getting started on that and showing the basic components of one of these types of scripts. And so we talked a little last time about prerequisites present, you know, which allows the whole script to proceed, and this one's as full steam ahead. We don't have any prerequisites, just return true for whoever's asking, and so that basically activates the whole script that follows. Were it to return false, then none of what we did here would bear any fruit in game. But when you get to load, you know, load is fed, and this is common on most vehicle mods. You know, you'll see a load and it's going to be fed the XML file. The XML file in question is this one over here. You know, any XML file that is for a mod, when you put all this data in here, just know that there is a Lua script that is calling it up. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure there are Lua scripts calling everything that you see in here and using it in some fashion. That's why we have to spell it and set this up just perfectly, because man, if you don't spell something properly, the code will find out and it will not work, and you'll be frustrated. And yes, I'm speaking from lots of experience in saying that it's an enormous exactitude required. It has to be spelled properly. So in here, you're loading up stuff that is over in the XML file. You are setting up variables and things that your script is going to need. Some of it is putting things on the self table. For example, we have a function below called search objects. So what we did is we put it directly into the self table. Self refers to the underlying vehicle as a whole. That would be our trailer, and it refers to the script. So for purposes of the script, hey, grab this function and attribute it only to this instance that we load up. That may seem, I'm not even sure I'm describing that properly, but if we don't do that, then there's some different ways we need to write our code below. We can't attribute it to self, and sometimes, like if you were to have multiple of these trailers out there, they might get confused with each other because a command on one may impact all of them. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're identifying the additional functions that we have below that are custom functions. And then we get into here. Remember the trigger in the last episode? Here we're loading that sucker, and there's a code here to add it to the game. We're defining on log trigger That is the name of it. And down below, clear at the bottom, on log trigger, here's where we define what's going to happen when things fall into our new trigger. You know, and every trigger has the trigger ID, other ID. You know, this I think is the ID of the trigger. This is stuff that comes into the trigger. And then there's certain actions on enter, on leave, on stay, and then there's even other shapes so that can come in there. So that's kind of how these are all set up, but you do have to identify it here on log trigger, and that gets established clear up here in load. And then it's defined, you know, the trigger becomes an object, you know, that is used in game. We're setting up another little, just like we started the script as a table, we're setting up another table for trigger logs. When logs hit the trigger, they go into our table here, and then the rest of the script has this table to access to know what to do with those logs, namely to get them out of the trigger and load them in the trailer. You know, these are toggles. You know, the script needs to know if we are in loading mode or unloading. Can't be one or the other, so we'll have some code later that defines that. Here we are loading the unload locations, left, right, and back. And this is the code that you put in there for the add. And you got to be careful. Utils, index to object, self components. This is just kind of how you load it when you're in here. It's a string file we're looking for. We're looking at the XML file. And this you got to be really careful about. It's all defined in here. And it's by these first tags. Vehicle. So you see vehicle here. Load or log unload placement left. So you go vehicle and then you come down log unload placement, and then here's the definition for left. So this is going to pull up this index right here. And then of course it's going to get right and it's going to get back. And log placement, of course, will get that node there. It doesn't matter so much what things are named in here, so long as the code over here knows how to pull them up. So you can call it node, you can call it left, you could call it whatever name that you wanted to give it, as long as it calls it up over here. These here, I chose to put in left, right, back. I speak English, so this is going to show up in the draw. This is a terrible way to do it. There'd be a much better way to do it, but we would have to modify the mod.desc file to add additional texts to appear. I just chose to just type it in. This isn't the way you would do it if you were going to release this. Unload location is picking which of the three is the starting point. It's always going to pick the first one. We're going to unload to the left. Then the player can toggle it in game. Here we go through those locations. We turn them off to make sure we don't see them. Set visibility to off, except for the first location. We turn that one back on. Ditto with load location. We turn all of them off. Oh, and then this thing here. Well, maybe I'll deal with this first. We have a timer in here, just set to 0. This is just defining a variable, letting us know what all the variables are that we're using in the script. And this here was, this was so painful. This took me so long to figure out. These are tables based on each tree. Now I want you to notice that we'll take this one at the top, 25-meter tree. So we come in here. Here's a 25-meter tree, pine 25 to harvest. And I was showing earlier, they're all the logs that we're going to get. It only allows us to cut the logs in certain predefined areas. So you can see the logs that we're going to get out of this. There's another log here, another one here, another one here. But I want you to notice something. Here we are way up here. Do you see this down here? This is where the node is for all of these logs. And ordinarily, when you have a 3D object, you want the node right smack in the middle of it or on the edge of it. But the problem I had in here was The node for the top of the tree was way down at the bottom of the tree, and this presents a real problem because when this object enters the trigger, the node is way outside of it, which is okay, but everything typically goes off of the node. So when I tell, over here on the trailer, and let's see here, let's get our, here's the point that logs drop into the trailer. It is node to node. So this node at the bottom, when it's, say, the tippy top of the tree, here's the node, and here's the node where it's going to drop. Well, there ain't nothing to drop. What's going to happen is, and happened many times till I figured it out, is the tree trunk would drop way up here instead of over here. And I had dickens of a time figuring out how to scoot this node back way over here so that the log dropped in the proper place. Eventually got it figured out. It was just a major pickle to do it. One of the ways I had to do it was looking here and figuring out, okay, here's the node. How many meters up do I have to go to get into the middle of this log? Well, I figured it out for each one of these, for each type of tree, and I put those measurements over here. So for the 25-meter tree, it's 2 meters from the base of the tree. Well, the 0 here, this is for, these are all by tree indices. So when it's a trunk labeled 1, and you can kind of see this. Let me see, do I still have the, okay, maybe I don't have it on. I had a save game file, but you'll see in there it defines the trunk index, if you will, of these. This is the base of the tree. Well, the node is on that's the stump. So there's a 0. The node is just fine. But to get up to the other node, you need at least 2 meters of clearance and 6 meters to the next, 11.5, so forth and so on. I had to figure out all these measurements for each tree and plug them in here so that the script could use this data to know how to move the nodes. Now, there's probably a much better way to do it, and I just don't know how. So this is kind of what I did. I think I mentioned the last episode, this is kind of all cobbled together. I did the best I could, to figure that out. Anyway, suffice it to say, this whole section is loading all the things that we need. So whenever the game loads, whenever you buy a new one and it brings the trailer out for the first time, this is everything it's going to run. These areas here, read stream, write stream, are for multiplayer gaming. Read stream is what it does on, well, and maybe I should describe that just a little bit. Whenever you have multiplayer, you have at least 2 computers involved. Only one of them can have the main game on it, the main save game, if you will, and that is the server. That one is treated as the server. And the one that attaches to it or that comes in for multiplayer gaming is called client. So the two need to talk to each other. So obviously when you first get into a multiplayer game, one of the things that it does is it runs these functions here. The server writes data that it knows the client needs to know. So when you log on, anything that appears in these functions, it says, hey client, here's some details you need to know. And then of course on the client side, it is a read stream, and it's going to read what the server tells it to do. That's kind of just what's going on. And I don't even have any code in here to show you. This isn't set up to be multiplayer compatible, at least not at the moment, and I probably won't because I'm not playing multiplayer really. And this is something, a script that I won't release. So there's no need to really make it multiplayer compatible. But this is what happens on join. And there's many other things that happen multiplayer related, because it isn't just when you join the server. Obviously, as you drive around and do stuff in game, if you're on the client, anytime you do something that the server needs to know, that there is code that sends the signals back and forth. Like when you steer your tractor, when you lift or lower that cultivator that you're pulling. Or in our case here, when you start or end the loading of logs. Those are commands, that would need to be sent to the server so that it knew what was going on. Otherwise, if you don't do that, well then eventually weird things happen in game. Where you'll think you're hauling a load of logs and then all of a sudden they'll all disappear out of your trailer, because the server catches up and says, wait a minute, all these logs are supposed to be over here because they didn't know that you loaded them, and so forth and so on. Draw. This is typically for what appears in the F1, the help menu, if you will. So remember, we had in the mod description, we set up these various texts. And so what you'll see over here is these texts are going to show up in these commands, and it'll show up in the F1 menu. So that's kind of what's going on here. You're adding help button texts. Some of them have information to them, like this one here adds some additional data as to what side we're on. This here is calling up what table we're on, and this is just calling up which side. This is where I said I didn't do a very good job programming this. This is going to pick up the left, right, or back. That grabs this and it's going to put it in there so we can see it. But if you speak another language, it isn't set up, to be compatible with that. And then also in here, it's identifying the input binding that, impacts or executes whatever shows up here in draw. Update is kind of an engine for a script. It is called every frame in the game. That's what the DT stands for. I don't know what DT literally means. I just know that this is called every frame. Update tick is every several frames. So what you want to typically have an update is all your input bindings, because you want your game to be really responsive whenever you press a key. So a lot of times that's what you'll see in update, or on update as it's now called. So quick calculations happens up here. I just used it for the sake of input bindings. So first you want to make sure you're active, you're sitting in the tractor and the trailer's there. And then if input binding has event, and then it gives all the specific input bindings, and these of course were defined. That's where we have them in the mod desk over here. That's all down this row. Here now we're actually using them in here, and we do stuff. So this one here is a simple toggle. Input binding load log. Well, your loading is either on or it's off. There would have been an easier way to do this. I think a toggle. There would be a quicker way to write it. I'm a novice. I also wanted to do some set visibility in here. There's also turning unloading on or off depending on what's going here as well. And so forth. This is moving our toggle for the unload zone, whether it's left, right, or back. So you can see it's adding it to it, and if it gets to the end of the number of locations, it turns it back to 1. There's some visibility things going on. Here's our unloading toggle. Here's showing those unload zones, if we want to see them. So that all happens in here in update. In update tech, this is a little slower, but this is kind of where the main engine of the script is that actually does the loading and unloading. So again, we want to be active, so this isn't just doing it when the trailer's sitting there and we're not in the tractor. So this is only when we're in it. So if it's loading, it's going to do this stuff up here. If it's unloading, then it's going to do this stuff down here. That's about how simple it is. There's a and it's looking for if it's loading and if there is more than one log in the trigger. If there's no logs in the trigger, it isn't going to do anything here. Well, we already kind of pointed out the trigger down here. When it lands in the trigger, this code is designed to look at it and see what it is. If it's a bale or something else, it isn't going to do anything with it. It wants to know, is this a log? So it takes this other ID thing that lands in the trigger, and it says if on enter or on leave do the following. Is it a log? Well, this is one adaptation I made to some of these in here. I came in and every single trunk I added a boolean in here, and an attribute is log. That's what it's looking for. There probably was another way to do it. That's just the way I chose. As a matter of fact, I know there was another way to do it. I won't go into that. This is just how I chose to do it here. So this is true when the box is checked. So it's looking for those in, whoops, wrong one. It's looking for those here in the trigger. And if it sees is a log, I also then added get rigid body type to make sure it's dynamic. I want a moving log. I don't want it to pick up a stump. And you know, now that I think of it, it shouldn't be picking up a stump anyhow, but maybe it seems like I did pick up a stump in one of these, so I might have picked up the wrong, I might have accidentally put this attribute on a stump in another one. But anyway, I want a dynamic object, one that moves around, isn't static. Then once I know I've got a log, a dynamic log, and it looks up the object's node from a game table, and if it exists, which of course it will, and if we're on enter, it takes that log and it shoves it into this table, trigger logs. And this down here is for when it leaves the trigger, and it removes it from the table so that we don't pick it up. So this is all happening in the trigger, and then of course up here in update tick, it is looking for it. So if we have logs in here, and it's going to pick them up and it's going to put them in our trailer. But first, it's going to run a timer. So it's going to count down the timer, and since we start with 0, it's going to immediately come and do this. And I forced it to have a timer of half a second. That's 500 milliseconds. And the reason is because if you log all of them at once, this code is so fast, it will just bunch them all up in the same area, and they may go flying all over. So I tried to slow it down a little bit so it would take its time, you know, picking them up. Every half a second it'll pick one up, because you got to give, it takes them up in the air, then it drops them, and you got to give the physics time to drop them out of the way before it grabs another. So that's what's going on here. And only when the timer reaches 0. So of course when it's less than or equal to 0, the timer's reset, and then it's going to come right back around. And you know, if it isn't less than or equal to 0, it just keeps going until this triggers again and comes in here. So for anything sitting in the trigger, it identifies a specific log, and it removes it from physics, meaning it no longer is subject to whatever the physics engine's telling it to do, meaning you could suspend it in mid-air if you chose. So right now it's on the ground. We remove it from the physics. Here we look up some information about it, and this is where it plugs in the information up here on the trunk types. How far away is this silly node that we have to account for in order to get this to land in our trailer? So it's looking up that data. I got some old print functions here. For a while I was printing it to the log so I can monitor this. And once it has this information, it says, okay, who knows how this log is lying on the ground? Let's orient it. So it's calling up a function with our load location. Grab the log, and here's the distance, you know, that we learned about this particular trunk. It's just looking it up in a table. Well, this here is, it's coming to another function that we have down here, orient joint. And this one here, most of the code that is in here was already in it. I didn't have to rewrite this, but the load locations here, the log is here, the distance we're dealing with is here. So I don't even know how much to describe here, but it is extremely complicated in my mind to figure out some of these functions as to how they work. I spent a ton of time here, but basically what it's doing is it's looking at the log and the target, and it's looking at the source, and they might be pointed different directions in game. They're different locations. The nodes are in a different spots. We kind of have to account for it here. And it says, let's line these up. Let's get them in the same spot. And all I can say is that it works. So this part here, is looking at where the log is relative to the trigger. So here, or excuse the trigger, I keep saying trigger, relative to the load spot. So where the load spot is, the log, and here it's putting them in the same space. And then, I mean, this looks like it's in German. It's probably rotating it to be the same rotation. You can get it in the same spot, okay, but what if it lays across your trailer rather than, you know, lengthwise in the trailer? So this is looking up the rotations of both objects and telling the log to be turned. It tells the code to turn it, set the direction of the log so that it lines up with the trailer. And that's really all I want to say about that. That's the whole purpose of this. This orient joint is to grab the log and move it into the trailer at the proper angle, or rather to move it to the load spot. Once it's done this, we want to note that the log is in the trailer, that it's dropped. Dropped means for me is outside the trailer. Since it's in the trailer, I'm giving it a false. Once it's up, kind of hanging suspended over the trailer, we add it back to physics. Gravity takes over on our log and it's going to drop into our trailer. Final step, we remove it from our trigger. So that's kind of the whole load process. The unload process was similar, just kind of in reverse. Again, we have it on a timer so we don't blow them all over the place. But here we do it a little bit differently. We are, and I probably could have set them up consistent. I don't know why I did it different. Here we are searching objects. So that calls here, let's find if there's a log close to us to unload. Well, remember, we only have a small area in here that we wanted to search. So we wanted to search for these objects. And ideally we'd say, well, they're right there, silly. You know, can't you get them in there? Maybe we could have set up a table for them or whatnot. I don't know. Maybe there is a table of them and I don't even know where it is. But what I chose to do in here was search the entire items to save. This is where your vehicles are, your bales, everything. So it is searching that table to find these logs. So if it locates a forest mod trunk, or it's going to get a user attribute if it sees that it is a log, if it sees that it's not dropped, meaning it's sitting in the trailer. Remember up here we said false, so that's going to be one that will pick up. It's going to leave any of them on the ground alone. If we see that it is a rigid body type of dynamic, it's a real log, well, okay, then we have something here. So it's pulling up data. Again, we're going to get our distance because we're going to have the same problem unloading as we did loading, dealing with, you know, this silly distance between the base of the tree and the node. I mean, it's just so far away from the log. So we're accounting for it here, and let's see if it's in range. You know, so we want to make sure it's in range of our trailer. So is object in range, and it gives the node of the log. There's an this is an argument we don't need, so I put nil, and then I send the distance. So it comes up here. Could have done all of this probably in the same function, but I didn't because it was already set up this way. Is kind of why. So here I am doing something similar to this orient joint down here, calculating the distance between the unload zone and my trailer and the location of this log, and trying to make sure it is less than 1 meter away, which seems to work. But I think it's probably mainly the fact that it's not a drop log. So if the distance is less than 1, it returns it is. If that is true, it's going to come back into here and true. So is in range is going to be true. So if is in range is true, then return item.item, that's this particular log, and it sends it back up here to our script, you know, here that called it. So if we have it, it's going to have a log in here. So if you have a log to unload, then do everything here. So it's going to do the same thing we did above here, except in reverse. It's going to remove it from physics. It's going to move it up to the spot. It's going to orient it to the particular unload spot, and then it's going to drop. Now we say true because it's dropped on the ground. So that's really what's going on in here. And again, I don't know if that's meaningful to anyone. This is kind of how my brain works in making a script like this. And I think we pretty well have covered the rest of it. Some of these we don't have anything going on, even though we may need to have it. There isn't really anything saved. There is a delete function here, you know, where we got to remove the trigger when the game is closed. So I just wanted to kind of talk through that, and maybe, hopefully I've given enough here that if someone wanted to type it up on their own, they could too. This, I just embedded it in the forestry mod, you know, so I could call it up with this particular log trailer. So, I think we made it through. We're almost to the end of this episode. You know, really, if I come back in here in game, what I really need to do at this juncture, yep, there's the bell. I need to go, I want to sell this thing so I don't have this thing hanging out there, and then I don't care if the front loader appears or not. Then I need to take this over to our sawmill to see if it will allow me to unload logs. So that's kind of my next tasks, and I think I've picked them up, all of them up that I found on the ground. Really should mow over here to make sure I got them all. I got a stump over here to deal with. I think there's some stumps over here, maybe one or two, and maybe one along here. I just can't remember if there is a stump down in here or not. So plenty of work to do here on good old Beskidy. But this is kind of some of the hoopla I went through to try to get an auto log loading trailer. And I think that's going to allow me to continue doing forestry. Maybe it's because I don't have the patience. I don't know what it is. But this hook, this whatever you call it, just didn't work as well as I was hoping. And I'm not sure the ones that came with the forestry mod would work really any better either, unless some of them had an auto grab thing on it, you know, where you could do this. Maybe my fingers just lacked dexterity, but I think for my own sanity this is going to make for a whole lot better gameplay. So I'm looking forward to taking this over and giving it a try. But for now, the episode's through, so thank you so much for sticking with it for another episode. I promise next time we'll haul this over and do some real logging in here and get that taken care of. Thank you for coming along. I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.